Imagine if you discovered that the story of Mary, the mother of Jesus, began long before her famous yes to the angel Gabriel. Behind this young woman chosen to be the mother of the Savior lies a narrative filled with faith, miracles, and devotion. But did you know that the Gospels do not directly mention Mary's parents? Joachim and Anne, whose names are revealed in apocryphal texts, play a crucial role in the story leading up to the birth of Christ. In this video, we'll explore the surprising details of these two characters' lives, drawing from ancient accounts and Christian traditions. You'll learn how they overcame seemingly insurmountable challenges, experienced miracles, and laid the groundwork for the greatest event in Christian history. Joachim and Anne, Mary's parents, are figures of profound importance in Christian tradition, even though they are not mentioned in the canonical Gospels. Their stories, derived from apocryphal texts such as the Proto-Evangelium of James, reveal a deeply devout couple, essential to the narrative culminating in Jesus' birth. Christian tradition identifies Joachim as a direct descendant of the House of David, connecting Mary and Jesus to the messianic lineage prophesied in the Old Testament. This genealogy underscores the legitimacy of the Messiah coming from Israel's royal line, highlighting Joachim's critical role in this divine plan. In addition to his ancestry, Joachim is depicted as a righteous and pious man. He earned his living as a herdsman and was known for his generosity. A striking aspect of his life was his practice of dividing his earnings into three parts: one for supporting his family, another for offering to the temple in Jerusalem, and the last for helping the poor. This division of resources reflects not only his sense of social justice, but also his religious devotion. Anne, Joachim's wife, is often associated with the priestly lineage of the tribe of Levi. This suggests that she was familiar with Jewish rituals and precepts, fostering Mary's upbringing in an environment of faith and devotion. Anne is remembered as a woman of great resilience. Her steadfast faith, even in the face of criticism and humiliation from other women, demonstrates remarkable strength of character. Joachim and Anne lived in the region of Galilee, likely in a modest village surrounded by the rural setting, typical of the period. The Jewish people of the time lived under the oppression of the Roman Empire, which created significant social and political tensions. Nevertheless, for families like Joachim and Anne's, daily life was deeply rooted in religious tradition, with the temple and the precepts of the Torah serving as the foundation of their existence. While their names may seem secondary to the overarching story, Joachim and Anne's identity as Mary's parents carries deep symbolic significance. Their union reflects a unique combination of royal and priestly lineages, prefiguring Jesus' role as the Messiah who would fulfill both the Davidic promise and the role of the high priest. Furthermore, their faithfulness to the law and dedication to God created the ideal environment for raising Mary. From the very beginning, Mary was prepared for an extraordinary mission, made possible by the example of righteousness and faith set by her parents. Before becoming Mary's parents, Joachim and Anne lived lives marked by simplicity and devotion to God. Despite facing significant challenges, such as childlessness, they remained steadfast in their spiritual journey, leading lives of deep religious commitment and strong family values. Joachim and Anne resided in Nazareth, a humble village in Galilee. This small community primarily consisted of farmers, shepherds, and artisans. Life in Nazareth was simple, yet deeply connected to the religious practices of Judaism. The couple's daily routine reflected the culture of the time. Joachim, as a shepherd, tended flocks and participated in the agricultural cycle, while Anne managed the household, prepared meals, and oversaw the family's prayer practices and celebrations of Jewish festivals. Though they lived in a modest rural setting, their lives were closely tied to the temple in Jerusalem, the spiritual center of the Jewish people. They participated in annual pilgrimages and contributed offerings, demonstrating a level of commitment that extended beyond obligatory practices. As devout Jews, Joachim and Anne lived in accordance with the Torah. Their faith was central to their lives, shaping not only their actions, but also their worldview. Values such as justice, charity, and obedience to the law guided their daily decisions. Their home was likely a place of religious learning, where texts like the Psalms and the stories of the patriarchs were recited and celebrated. This environment was crucial in shaping Mary, preparing her for her future mission. In Nazareth, community life played an important role. Neighbors and friends shared the same traditions and religious rituals, fostering a sense of unity among families. However, the couple faced a challenge that somewhat isolated them: infertility. In a community that valued the continuity of family lineage, Joachim and Anne endured the judgmental gazes of others. This reality placed them in a vulnerable position, but also strengthened their faith, making them even more reliant on their trust in God. Although childlessness was a significant challenge, Joachim and Anne remained faithful to religious practices and community service. For them, waiting was not a passive act, but an active one. They prayed, worked, and lived righteously before God and their community. This period before Mary's birth was not marked by miraculous events, but by the demonstration of virtues such as patience, perseverance, and humility. Their daily lives reveal the depth of their faith, even in times of uncertainty. In biblical tradition, infertility often emerges as a central theme in narratives preceding great divine interventions. In the case of Joachim and Anne, as in other biblical stories, the inability to have children was not merely a personal challenge, but a symbol of waiting, transformation, and fidelity to God's purpose. In first-century Jewish culture, fertility was regarded as a divine blessing, directly tied to the fulfillment of God's promises to the people of Israel. The command to be fruitful and multiply, Genesis 1:28, underscored the importance of having children to preserve familial heritage and strengthen the nation. Infertility, on the other hand, was often interpreted as a sign of divine disfavor or the result of sin. Childless couples frequently faced disapproving glances, silent criticism, and even social exclusion. This cultural context made Joachim and Anne's experience even more challenging, as they bore not only personal sorrow, but also the weight of social stigma. Their story reflects a recurring theme found in numerous biblical narratives: faithful couples who face infertility before being blessed with children destined for special missions. Abraham and Sarah. They waited decades for the promise of a child, and Isaac was born as the heir of God's covenant with Abraham. Isaac and Rebekah. Rebekah was barren for many years until God heard Isaac's prayers, and she gave birth to Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Rachel. They also endured infertility before Rachel bore Joseph, who played a critical role in preserving the people of Israel. Elkanah and Hannah. Hannah, who became the mother of the prophet Samuel, fervently prayed in the temple, marking the start of a new chapter in Israel's history. Zechariah and Elizabeth. In the New Testament, the miraculous birth of John the Baptist to this elderly couple heralded the coming of the Messiah. These stories demonstrate that infertility, far from being a final obstacle, is often used by God as a prelude to a greater purpose. The waiting, suffering, and perseverance of these couples become catalysts for deeper faith and divine intervention that exceeds human expectations. From a spiritual perspective, infertility in biblical narratives holds profound symbolism. It represents humanity's inability to achieve something by its own efforts, highlighting the necessity of God's intervention. Just as barren land needs rain to flourish, infertility points to humanity's complete dependence on the Creator. For Joachim and Anne, Their infertility was not merely a test of faith, but also a preparation for the miracle to come. Their prayers and steadfastness in the face of adversity revealed the depth of their trust in God. They did not know how or when their hopes would be fulfilled, but they continued to live righteous lives, believing that God had a greater plan. In their case, infertility was transformed into a testimony of divine grace. Their story reminds us that even in the most challenging circumstances, God is at work bringing forth something extraordinary, and that no waiting is in vain when entrusted to Him. After years of waiting and sorrow, Joachim and Anne were blessed with a promise that would change their lives forever. This moment was not only the fulfillment of their prayers, but also a pivotal event in the story of redemption, demonstrating how God works at the right time to accomplish His plans in extraordinary ways. Joachim and Anne endured a period of trial. Infertility, seen in Jewish culture as a sign of divine disapproval, compounded their personal pain with social judgment. However, instead of giving up or rebelling, they turned even more fervently to God. Deeply distressed, Joachim chose to withdraw to the wilderness to pray and fast. In biblical tradition, the wilderness is often portrayed as a place of encounter with God, symbolizing purification and spiritual renewal. There, in solitude, Joachim sought answers and pleaded with God to look upon their situation, demonstrating his complete dependence on divine grace. Meanwhile, Anne remained at home, equally devoted to prayer. According to tradition, she prayed in her garden, lamenting her condition yet never losing faith. Her prayers reflect a profound trust in God's goodness, even after years of silence. These actions reveal how the couple faced their struggles, with a faith that remained steadfast even when circumstances seemed impossible. The turning point in Joachim and Anne's story came with the appearance of an angel to both of them, delivering a message that would change their lives and, ultimately, the course of human history. In the wilderness, as Joachim prayed and fasted, an angel appeared to him and said, "God has heard your prayers. Your wife Anne will bear a daughter who will be a blessing to all humanity." The angel also instructed Joachim to return home, where he would find Anne with the same message. At home, Anne also received an angelic visitation while praying. The angel announced that God had seen her affliction and promised that she would bear a daughter. The apocryphal text describes this daughter as one blessed above all women and destined for a special purpose. After receiving these angelic messages, Joachim and Anne reunited. According to the Proto-Evangelium of James, their reunion took place at the gate of their home, where they embraced with tears of joy and gratitude. This moment was more than just a celebration of a promise. It was also a sign of restoration. Years of pain and shame were transformed into hope and joy. Shortly thereafter, Anne conceived Mary. The birth of their daughter was not only a source of immense happiness for the couple, but also a renewal of purpose in their lives. While the Proto-Evangelium of James does not describe extraordinary details about Mary's birth, the conception itself was miraculous, given Anne's prolonged infertility and the couple's advanced age. These elements echo other biblical narratives, such as those of Sarah and Abraham or Elizabeth and Zechariah, emphasizing God's pattern of fulfilling His purposes through seemingly impossible circumstances. Mary's arrival marked the beginning of a new chapter for Joachim and Anne. As parents, they dedicated their daughter to God's service from the very beginning, in gratitude for the miracle they had received. This dedication of Mary was an expression of their faith and recognition that she was meant for a greater purpose. This event highlights a recurring biblical theme. God transforms situations of barrenness and pain into sources of life and hope. Mary's birth is a testament to God's power to turn suffering into purpose, paving the way for the arrival of the Savior. Following the fulfillment of the promise and Mary's birth, Joachim and Anne demonstrated their gratitude and faithfulness to God in a special way by dedicating their daughter to service in the Temple of Jerusalem. This act, mentioned in the Proto-Evangelium of James and celebrated in Christian traditions, reflects not only the couple's obedience but also their acknowledgement that Mary was a child set apart for a divine purpose. In Jewish tradition, the Temple of Jerusalem was the spiritual center of religious life. It was customary for families to make special vows to dedicate their children to God's service, particularly in moments of gratitude for blessings received. This practice is seen in the story of Hannah, the mother of the prophet Samuel, who dedicated her son to service in the tabernacle after God granted her fervent prayers for a child. 1 Samuel 1:24-28. For Joachim and Anne, the decision to take Mary to the temple was the fulfillment of a vow made during their years of waiting. They had promised that if God granted them a child, that child would be dedicated to the Lord. According to the Proto-Evangelium of James, Mary was brought to the temple at a very young age, possibly around 3 years old. The account describes how Joachim and Anne, filled with emotion, led her to the temple, where she was received by the priests and integrated into the temple community. This narrative suggests that Mary was raised in a profoundly spiritual environment, participating in prayers, scripture readings, and activities related to temple life. While the canonical Bible does not mention this period of Mary's life, apocryphal traditions emphasize that this dedication was a preparation for the role Mary would later fulfill as the mother of Jesus. Mary's dedication to the temple is rich with symbolism. First and foremost, it demonstrates the absolute obedience of Joachim and Anne to God, acknowledging that Mary was a divine gift. By presenting her to the temple, they affirmed that their daughter primarily belonged to God's plan. Moreover, this act of consecration reflects a recurring theme in Scripture: God using ordinary people to accomplish His extraordinary purposes. Raised in the sacred environment of the temple, Mary was prepared from an early age to embrace the unique responsibility that would later be entrusted to her. Tradition suggests that Mary's time in the temple was fundamental to her spiritual and emotional formation. Surrounded by priests, Levites, and other devoted servants, she had the opportunity to grow in wisdom, prayer, and knowledge of the Scriptures. This environment shaped Mary into a God-fearing young woman whose faith and humility would be essential in her response to God's call years later. Mary's dedication also highlights the devotion of her parents. Joachim and Anne not only fulfilled their vow to God, but continued to demonstrate their faith by entrusting their daughter to divine service. For them, this act was both a gesture of gratitude and an expression of trust in God's plan for Mary. The dedication of Mary to the temple is celebrated in various Christian traditions, particularly in the Catholic and Orthodox churches, where it is commemorated as the Feast of the Presentation of Mary on November 21st. This celebration underscores the significance of this event as a milestone in the preparation for the story of salvation. The political, social, and spiritual environment of first-century Judea played a crucial role in shaping messianic expectations and influencing the experiences of faith and challenges faced by families like Joachim and Anne's. Judea during the 1st century was under the control of the Roman Empire, governed by client kings like Herod the Great and later by Roman procurators. Roman rule was marked by economic and religious oppression. Heavy taxation and restrictions on Jewish practices created widespread discontent among the population. This situation fueled a growing expectation for the coming of the Messiah, who, according to prophecies, would be Israel's promised deliverer. Joachim, Anne, and other devout Jews lived with this hope, nurtured by readings and prayers, anticipating divine intervention to restore Israel's glory. The temple in Jerusalem was the spiritual heart of Judaism, Beyond being the site for sacrifices, it symbolized God's presence among his people. Families like Joachim and Anne's participated in annual pilgrimages to religious festivals, such as Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. These celebrations strengthened faith and communal identity during times of foreign occupation. At the same time, local synagogues played a vital role in religious education and the preservation of Jewish traditions, especially in smaller villages like Nazareth. Here, the faithful gathered to study the scriptures, recite psalms, and listen to teachings from scribes and Pharisees. First-century Judaism was not monolithic. Various religious movements influenced the practices and beliefs of the time. Pharisees emphasized strict adherence to the Torah and oral traditions, promoting a form of religiosity accessible to ordinary people. Sadducees controlled the temple and aligned with political elites. They rejected oral tradition and did not believe in resurrection or angels. Essenes, an ascetic and separatist group, possibly associated with communities like Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. Zealots, a political religious movement advocating armed rebellion against Rome. Joachim and Anne were likely aligned with Pharisaic teachings, which valued personal piety and a community life centered on the Torah. Their alignment with these principles would have shaped their faith and daily practices, emphasizing the importance of justice, charity, and devotion to God, values they passed on to Mary, preparing her for the extraordinary role she would fulfill in salvation history. Although Jewish society was patriarchal, women played a significant role in preserving family and religious traditions. They were responsible for passing on the teachings of faith to their children, especially in the early stages of life. Anne, like other women of her time, likely led prayers at home, taught psalms, and ensured the observance of dietary laws and religious festivals. This maternal spiritual influence was crucial in shaping Mary's character, fostering her deep faith and submissive heart to God's will from an early age. The Jews of Joachim and Anne's time lived under the weight of external oppression, but also with renewed hope. The prophecies of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and other prophets fueled the longing for a Messiah who would establish God's kingdom and restore Israel. This expectation permeated daily life, shaping prayers, teachings, and the worldview of the people. Mary, born into this context, grew up immersed in an atmosphere of faith and messianic hope, preparing her heart for the extraordinary calling she would one day receive. Nazareth, the likely home of Joachim and Anne, was a small and seemingly insignificant village. Located in Galilee, far from the political center of Jerusalem, Nazareth represented the simplicity of rural life. Families like Joachim and Anne's made their living through agricultural, pastoral, and artisanal activities. The community was united by faith and labor, facing challenges together in light of Roman occupation and economic hardships. The importance of Joachim and Anne transcends their biography. They are not merely the parents of Mary. Their faith and dedication were fundamental in shaping the spiritual foundation of the one who would be called blessed among women. Without the atmosphere of prayer, obedience, and gratitude cultivated in their home, Mary might not have been as prepared to respond to God's call with her famous words, "Behold, I am the servant of the Lord," Luke 1:38. Furthermore, Mary's birth, the fruit of their union, is often seen as a prelude to Christ's birth. Just as the Old Testament points to the New, the story of Joachim and Anne points to Mary, who, in turn, points to Jesus. In Christian theology, Joachim and Anne are often remembered for their faith during a time of waiting. Their perseverance through years of infertility echoes central biblical themes. God's silence does not mean his absence, and his promises always come to fruition at the right time. Their story also emphasizes the virtue of humility. They did not seek glory for themselves, but trusted God even when all seemed lost. Their quiet role and steadfast obedience make them perfect examples of faithful servants in God's plan. The veneration of Joachim and Anne began to develop in the early centuries of Christianity, particularly in the East. In the Orthodox Church, they are celebrated as saints and are often referred to as the grandparents of God, acknowledging their connection to Jesus. In the West, their veneration was widely promoted by the Catholic Church, especially during the Middle Ages. In 1584, Pope Gregory XIII officially established the Feast of Saints Joachim and Anne, celebrated on July 26. This date honors not only Joachim and Anne, but also grandparents and the importance of generational faith in Christianity. Saint Anne, in particular, became an iconic figure in Christian art. She is often depicted alongside Mary and the Christ child, symbolizing the connection between generations and the central role of family in the story of salvation. Theologically, Joachim and Anne are viewed as precursors to the grace that culminated in Mary and Jesus. Their role is akin to that of other Old Testament figures who paved the way for greater events, such as Abraham, Sarah, Moses, and David. Their story also reflects the theme of God's faithfulness. Not only did he answer their prayers, but he also wove them into his eternal plan of redemption. They serve as a living testimony that even seemingly minor roles in God's divine story carry profound significance. The story of Joachim and Anne, preserved through traditions and celebrated for generations, has left a lasting legacy for the Christian faith. More than simply the parents of Mary, they exemplify how God uses simple, faithful people to shape the great events of his redemptive plan. Their impact transcends their time and continues to inspire Christians worldwide. The greatest legacy of Joachim and Anne is undoubtedly Mary, the mother of Jesus. Her spiritual formation and character were shaped by the environment of devotion and obedience created by her parents. By preparing Mary for her mission, Joachim and Anne played a vital role in the story of salvation, albeit in a quiet and indirect manner. Mary's response to the angel Gabriel when she said, "Behold, I am the servant of the Lord," Luke 1:38, reflects the upbringing and example she received. The faith and humility that define her life have deep roots in the spirituality of Joachim and Anne. Joachim and Anne are often celebrated as a model of a family living according to God's will. Their union, marked by perseverance in faith and trust in the midst of adversity, exemplifies the role of the family as the foundation for transmitting spiritual and moral values. In Christian theology, Mary's family is seen as a prototype of familial holiness. Just as Mary prepared Jesus for his mission, Joachim and Anne were responsible for preparing Mary. This legacy serves as a reminder that spiritual formation begins at home and has the power to influence generations. The legacy of Joachim and Anne is honored in various Christian traditions, especially within the Catholic and Orthodox churches. Their feast day, celebrated on July 26th, provides an opportunity to reflect on their contribution to the story of salvation and their exemplary faith. Moreover, the veneration of Saint Anne and Saint Joachim as the grandparents of God emphasizes the importance of generations in the transmission of faith. Their story reminds Christians of the value of honoring and learning from previous generations, who often bear the responsibility of planting the seeds of faith in their descendants. Joachim and Anne's story is not only about Mary, but also about their own journey of faith. They show that God values fidelity and perseverance amid difficulties. Their testimony of trust in God, even when circumstances were unfavorable, is a timeless message of hope. By living lives of prayer, generosity, and obedience, they demonstrated that it is possible to play a meaningful role in God's plan, even in seemingly ordinary roles. Their legacy is an invitation for all Christians to live faithfully, trusting that God can use their lives for purposes far greater than they imagine. Even in times of waiting and uncertainty, they trusted in God and surrendered their lives to divine service. The birth of Mary and her role in the story of salvation are reminders that God works in quiet yet transformative ways in our lives. Above all, the legacy of Joachim and Anne is a call for all Christians to recognize the value of a life of faith, perseverance, and obedience, regardless of their place in history. Their example encourages us to remain steadfast in trusting God's plan, knowing that even the smallest acts of faith can contribute to His greater purpose. Thank you